Well, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you here celebrating our Thanksgiving Sunday worship service. The message that I want to share with you, and every time I get to speak for OICC, I get a sneak peek at Homoksa님's sermon. And so I'm inspired by what he prepares, and then I try to translate that into English. And the topic of today's sermon, the title is, "It's more blessed to give than to receive. It is more blessed to lose than to gain." And we get that from today's passage in Ruth chapter 4, verses 13 through 17. I think many times when we celebrate Thanksgiving, we give thanks to God for all the blessings that we've received throughout the year. And it's good. It's right for us to give thanks for the good things. We Christians, we humbly recognize that we live every second of every single day by God's grace. And for that, we ought to be thankful always. Today, I would like for all of us to be challenged by Boaz's example and for us to seek to thank God not only for the blessings that we receive, but more than that, for the many opportunities that we have received from God this year to serve, to give, to sacrifice, to lose, so that we may ultimately gain Christ and know Him and make Him known. Very rarely do we thank God for the things that we have lost, things that we have had to forfeit, the things that we've had to give up. And through God's word, we will learn today that it's more blessed to give than to receive, to lose in order to gain Christ. Now, today we find somebody, and I'm going to put pictures up here for the children. We find Boaz. Boaz was a person who was joyfully willing to suffer the loss of his goods and his possessions in order to give life to two poor widows, Naomi and Ruth. Now, God richly blessed him for his generous and sacrificial heart, as we see in today's passage. Not only did he gain a baby, he gained ultimately a lineage that saved Israel and it saved the world from their sins. Now, one of the things that strikes me about what Boaz did in today's passage was the fact that he didn't have to do what he did. He was in no way obligated to redeem Naomi and Ruth. Nobody would have accused him of being a selfish person had he chosen not to redeem them. Yes, they were relatives, but there was another man closer to them who could have paid off Naomi and Ruth's debt. Now, another remarkable thing that we find in today's passage is this, is that the world wants to gain. Boaz was willing to lose, to give up in order to bless others. So what do we find in chapter 4? We find Boaz. We find him who wants to serve Naomi and Ruth, and he wants to take Ruth as his wife. Now, the problem is that there is a family member, a kinsman-redeemer, who is closer than him, who has the right to redeem them and to take them. And so he goes to this person and says, hey, Naomi came back from Moab. She's very poor. She's a widow. And her ex-husband, Elimelech, who passed away, has a chunk of land. Do you want to buy it? And this kinsman-redeemer says, yes, I want the land. Not because he wanted to serve Naomi, but because he wanted to be rich. And so then Boaz says, not so fast. There's another part of the package. It's a package deal. Naomi is not alone. She has a daughter-in-law who's also a Moabite. She's a Gentile, and you have to take her as your wife. So then this person reconsiders and says, okay, then maybe not, because I have to feed her, I have to take care of her, I have to give up certain things in order to get this piece of land. Is it worth it? And he says, you know what? It's not worth it. And so he says, forget it, no deal. And then back then, the way they signed contracts is they gave each other their sandals. And so you can have my shoe, you can have my sandal, and you can take the land. I don't want the land, I don't want the woman, they are yours. And so he happily takes Ruth as his wife. Now obviously he had a little bit of self-interest because Ruth was a selfless, committed, loving woman. And so when he takes her, he is actually seeking gain. So he's saying the things that I lose are worth it because what I gain is much more. And that is really the Christian life, that we must be willing to suffer great loss for greater gain. And so what he does is he redeems them, and he is happy. He makes Ruth his wife. He gets the land, and the blessing that he gets is not only a wife, not only a child whose name is Obed, is the father of Jesse. Jesse is the father of David. David is a king of Israel, and David ultimately is an ancestor of Jesus the Messiah. So he is willing to give up a little bit of his money, of his time, of his efforts, and he gains infinitely more. And that is the Christian life. Now, I want to share a very personal story that illustrates this fact. And I think many of us don't give generously. I don't think any of us are willing to suffer loss because we fear that we're going to lose too much. What if we don't get it back? And I want to reassure you that you can never outgive God. Okay? You think you give so much to others and to God, God will give you more, infinitely more than you can imagine. And I want to close today with this story. There's a man that I met in 2011 in our Hispanic ministry, and this was a couple of months into my time here at Antioch Church. He came into the fellowship hall in a wheelchair, and he looked fairly mean, and he looked like a bad guy. So he came in church, and I asked him. He was really young, so I was like, "Is this guy faking that he's in need? Is he just acting like he's in a wheelchair when he's really, able-bodied and he can work?" He came in a wheelchair. I said, "What happened to you?" He said, "I had a heart attack." Like, "How old are you?" 30 years old. "Come on, you're too young to have a heart attack. You're lying, right? You didn't really have a heart attack." He said, "No, I really had a heart attack." I said, "What happened?" "Well, I had a heart attack, and then they took me to, I'm not going to name the hospital. I know the hospital, but I don't want to get anybody in trouble. They took me to a hospital in Philadelphia, and I was in a coma for 2.5 months. And the doctors didn't take care of me. They had to move me so that the blood would circulate throughout my body, but they didn't move me. They just let me die on the bed. And they would have actually pulled the plugs on him, life support, if his girlfriend hadn't gone multiple times to plead with the doctors, please don't let him die." And so, miraculously, after 2.5 months, he woke up. And the doctors were shocked. They're like, "Oh my gosh, he's alive." And they knew they were in trouble because the blood didn't reach all the way to his feet, to his toes. And his 10 toes actually had died. They were black, they were rotting. And the doctors didn't want to get in trouble. They didn't want to be sued by him. And so they had him sign a waiver form, and they sent him home. Said, "You're fine, go home." He's trying to walk up the stairs to his house, and he can't walk because his feet hurt so much. And so he went to Mercy Suburban Hospital in Norristown, and they told him, you either lose your toes or you lose your legs or maybe even your life. And so he made that very difficult decision to amputate his 10 toes. And so I knew he was not lying. He was not acting like he was sick. He was really in need. And so I took him to the hospital multiple times to get treatment. As you see all these pictures, and he's getting better. He's improving little by little. As you can tell, I'm sorry I put up these graphic pictures, but he was not lying. He did not have his 10 toes. So he could not walk, he could not work. And then one day I remember, it was after morning prayer, and he called me. It was around, I think, November, and it was starting to get cold. And he's like, "You know what, Pastor? I'm drunk, and I don't have anywhere to go. What do I do?" And so the first thing I thought was, if I don't help this guy's in trouble. And so I said, "Hey, I'll pick you up." I went to Norristown, I picked him up, I drove home. When I got home, I realized I'm not single anymore. I have a wife. I had lived as a single man for 26 years, and I was free to do whatever I wanted to do. I never had to ask anybody. I never had to make a decision together with my wife. And so I got home, and I realized, oops, I should have called her and let her know. But we were already there, so I walked into the room, and my wife was sleeping because she had to work early that day, and I walked into the room. I said, "Hey, little surprise here. I brought Fidel home." She's like, "What?" It's like, "Yeah, I'm sorry." It's like, "Yeah, you better. You don't even know this guy. Do you trust him? Like, what if he goes into our kitchen and grabs a knife and he comes after us and he stabs us and he kills? Like, what are you thinking?" And I said, "I wasn't thinking. But what is going to happen to him?" She said, "Fine, let's house him for a couple of days." And so he was over at our house, and he was drunk, so I bathed him, I shaved his head, I called his mom, let him know that he was okay. He started to get better. We started to show him the love of Christ, and here he is trying to work. Here he is in his wheelchair when we were out in Norristown, sharing the gospel with people. And this was one Thanksgiving, 2011, when he was sharing his testimony of how God was transforming him little by little. Little did I know he was a really bad guy. He was a drug dealer. He sold women into prostitution. He mugged people at gunpoint. That's why nobody wanted to help him, because he was the most hated person in Norristown. And I found this out later. His nickname was the Maniac. And everybody in Norristown knew him because he was a bad, bad guy. Had I known what I know now, I don't think I would have taken him home, to be completely honest. Anyway, so this is him, and he had his ups and downs. He'd fall back into drug addiction, he'd fall back into alcoholism. This was around February of the next year, 2012. And then in May, he decided, you know what, Pastor, I can't work, so I'm going to go back to Mexico. So this was actually the last day. He spent the night at our place, and then he didn't have any ID, he didn't have a passport, and so I sent him home to Mexico on a bus. 2 days and 21 hours, nonstop to Mexico. And this is me dropping him off at the Greyhound station in Center City, Philadelphia. And after I saw him board the bus, I started crying like a baby. To be honest, I didn't know what was going to happen later. And I cried because I honestly thought, like, he might die. He had a heart attack, and he might die on the way home. And so, thankfully, I got a text message from his family in Mexico saying he arrived safely. And so I was so thankful. This was May of 2012. In August, I went to take my ordination exam in Toronto. I went to Austria on a mission trip with PGM, and I got back, and I was planning a mission trip to Mexico, and I told them, I will see you next week. And then 2 days before the Mexico mission trip, I received a text message from his girlfriend here that he had passed away. So I went to Mexico, and I wasn't able to see him. I went to the cemetery. And I said, thank you. I said, thank you, because I thought I was serving you. I thought I was giving you so much. And I gained more than I ever gave you. Why? Because the one thing I remember the most from him is the time that I brought him home without my wife's permission. After like 3 or 4 days of taking care of this person, I was so burnt out. I said, God, I can't do this anymore. I was complaining. I was grumbling. I said, God, look at all the things I do for you. And then I remember one night, God was like, yeah, you do that much for me? What have you given up for me? I said, everything. Look at all this I do for you. Then God said, you know what? What you're doing is nothing in comparison to what I've done for you. So let's say what did you have to give up in order to bring him into your house? A couple of hours of your time? Not much. He said, what if you had a son? And that back then I didn't have a son. Now I do. And this son, his name is Elliot. I'm going to show you a picture of him. I have a son now, and his name is Elliot. This is a picture actually before Chung Il-gansa님's wedding. People say I look like him. I'm the original, he's a copy. He looks like me, okay? I have a son now, and I love my daughters equally, but I'm just giving you this example of my son because Jesus was God's son. And God told me one night, hey, if you had to give up your son, if you had to trade your son for Fidel, for this drug addict, drunk guy, would you do it? I said, no. If you had to kill your son to let him in to your house, would you do it? I said, God, no. He said, but I did it for you. I did it for you. I gave my son Jesus for you to let you into heaven. You did so much for me. You doing so much for me? That's when I learned that you can never outgive God. And brothers and sisters, today, this Thanksgiving, let's not give thanks to God for the things that we receive. Let's give thanks to God for the opportunity that He gives us to give generously, to serve, to sacrifice, to lose in order to gain Christ and to make Christ known. Amen? Hope you have a wonderful Sunday. God bless you. Thank you very much.